Hey, what's up, guys? Today I'm going to be going over the basics about Anki. Like the title says, I used to get pretty good grades, mostly A's and B's, but I do believe that when I started using Anki, I was consistently getting A's on my exams, and I felt like I retained the information much better than I did previously. All right, so just a little overview of what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over Anki, just like what it's about, card types, examples, some scheduling, and then I'm also going to talk about the MCAT. If that applies to you, that's cool, but if not, you don't have to watch that part. All right, so Anki is a spaced repetition program, whatever you want to call it. It's like Quizlet on steroids. So the biggest thing that I think Anki does best and other programs don't is if you have a set amount of time before the exam. Most of my exams in college were, let's say, every 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little more. You can basically adjust your Anki scheduling to match when the exam's going to be. I think something like Quizlet is great if you want to just cram some definitions before a test, but in reality, if you really want to perform well, you should be studying every day a little bit, because that's what I did, and that's how the program's supposed to be used. But that's basically the basis of spaced repetition. You space out your reviews so that the stuff you see later, and the stuff that you don't know you see quicker, basically. Also, it's super customizable. I think it makes it kind of fun because there's a lot of cool add-ons you can add to this program. Like for instance, there's a kill streak add-on. So if you ever played like FPS games, like I had like a Halo kill streak every time I get cards right, you can also change like backgrounds and stuff. I don't know. Just like little things that I think make the program really cool. Okay, so I'm going to go over just basically how I made the decks. So this is an example from my anatomy class. I make a deck every single day of class. I found that when I would do like exam one and then just add the cards to that folder, it would be difficult to see which cards I made and which ones I still need to make. And unfortunately, I would go like entire PowerPoints without making any cards for that PowerPoint, and that's just not a good way to do it. So I think if you date it and then add a title, it helps keep your like content review up to date, and you can check over it, make sure you're doing everything correctly. Also, I want to talk about this. So when you make a card, I thought of like, okay, if I make a card, I want to be able to see this and I want to be able to test one thing. I don't want to put a paragraph amount of information in the card, because in reality, like, that's just a waste of time. These cards are going to stack up if you do them correctly. So having wasted cards where it's just like a blob of information and there's nothing actually being tested is just a waste of your time. So definitely try to avoid that. Okay, so this is like a example of a PowerPoint slide from my anatomy class. When I see something like this, I want to use the closed deletion card type. So I'm gonna pull over this is the slide, and basically what I'm gonna think about is, okay, I'm being tested on the tunica intima, tunica media, and tunica adventitia. So my teacher was very nice, and he said, all right, the stuff in the yellow highlight is the most important stuff. So with that, I'm gonna basically highlight this. I'm gonna copy it. So I click up here, and I use the close miles down card type, but you can also use just the close type, whichever one you like. I used this for MCAT, so this kind of came with the deck that I used, and I just like the format better. But it doesn't matter if you use that or not. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste my term and definition into the close mile down, or the closed note type, whatever. And I'm going to highlight the definition, or I'm going to highlight the term. So I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to do Control-Shift-C. And then I'm going to highlight the definition, and I'll do Control-Shift-C again. So basically what this will look like, so see, I have 2 cards due, and if I start studying now, it'll say blank, endothelial cells minimize friction. Oh, I know that's the tunica intima. Let's see what it says. Tunica intima, interna, whatever. Okay, that's pretty good. I know that pretty well. Tunica intima, what is that? Okay, blah, 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 blah. Boom. So that's basically how the closed deletion looks. So I would do that for all of those. It would basically make 6 or 7 cards for this one slide. If you see something where, you want to add something else in it, you can always do more than one closed deletion. You can also do something kind of interesting that I'll show you. So let's say I want to copy this and I want to test this. I want to test this topic. So I'm going to put it in here. So this is funny. This is from an exam. I remember my teacher asked a question about this on an exam. But so let's say I start out with tunica adventitia and this general blob, or I guess that blob. So Control-Shift-C, connective tissue that strengthens walls, blah, 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 boom. So when I get shown this card, this is going to be blank and you're going to see everything else. But if I also wanted to, let's say if I wanted to test 2 terms at one time, so we could say, I want to say the vasavorum, blah, 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 and then also the coronary vessels are the equivalent. So what I'm going to do is change this to 3. And basically what it's going to say is large vessels have, I'll just show you, I guess. So this is an instance where I used 2 closed deletions for 1 card. So basically I'll say, oh, large vessels have blood vessels in this layer called blank, and blank are the equivalent in the heart. So this is an instance where I would test 2 definitions or terms at the same time. And okay, oh, it's called vasavorum, blah, 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 and then, oh, coronary vessels are equivalent in the heart. Got it. So that is just a simple example of how you can test 2 things at once, especially if they're related topics. That is very helpful. All right, so now that we've gone over closed deletion, I'm gonna go just do another quick example. So this is from my physiological psychology class. This class was very content heavy. I think that I made hundreds, if not thousands, of cards for this class, and Anki was just a game changer. So similar thing, I'm gonna highlight my term and definition, copy, go into Anki, blah, blah, blah. I'm using the closed deletion again, highlight this, boom, done. The reason why I use closed deletion and I don't use something like, there's another card type called basic and reversed. This is fine. So I do term, definition. This is fine if you have the time to type in each one, but in reality, I found that using the closed deletion was just so efficient. I could basically make 100 flashcards of content within like 10 or 15 minutes. And when you have really, really big PowerPoints, using that is going to save you a ton of time. So you can use the basic reversed if you'd like, but I just preferred to use the closed deletion. Okay, now I'm going to talk about another really important card type, and that's the image occlusion. So this is from another one of my neuroscience classes. We had to know like every part of this is a sheep brain. Yeah, I'm pretty sure sheep brain. But basically, I'm going to get this. Oh my gosh, there's so much stuff I need to know. This picture, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to screenshot it. And you see this little blue thing up here is how I add an image occlusion card. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to pull up what you screenshot will show up in here. And very self-explanatory, I guess. You need to make sure the rectangle is selected. Cover it. Boom, boom. Let's do just like one more. Another thing with this is if I wanted to cover up 2 at the same time, so that can be especially helpful, for instance, if, okay, so that's cingulate gyrus. I want to cover up this one. So let's say like all of my tests were free response, so I wouldn't have a word bank. So stuff like this was just not really how I was going to be tested. So for instance, if I wanted to test what this is pointing to, but I didn't want to have it like showing in the background, I can select both of these using the shift key. So I just shift click and then shift click that, and then I can press G or group, and it'll group them into one card. So I always do hide all guess one, because I found that if you know the landmarks, you're more likely to get like what's next to it. Like if I know this is the corpus callosum and I'm like, oh, it's probably lateral ventricle. However, that's not how it's going to be on your test. So I would just recommend using hide all guess one. So I'll hide all guess one, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, so this is an instance where it'll cover up both, and the red is what you're getting asked. So, oh my goodness, I wonder what this is. Cingulate gyrus, and see how both of them came off, and you can see both of them. So, I think that is another helpful little thing to do, especially when you have like big pictures like this, and the words might be duplicated or said twice. So, just something to keep in mind. Okay, now I'm gonna go over some of like the nitty gritty, I guess, of Anki. This is how I scheduled all of my class decks. So you can screenshot this and use it, but I'm just going to go over how, like, what the numbers mean. This, always put it at the max setting. If you want to be soft and only do 100 cards a day, that's fine. Frankly, you should be doing as many cards as you can a day. And maximum reviews, obviously, put it at the max. Learning steps, basically what this means is if I don't know it, I'm going to see it in 5 minutes. If I kind of know it, I'm going to see it in 3 hours. And I found that was a good kind of balance from like the default setting, because the default setting was like every 1 minute. And I found that at that time I was just using short-term memory, which is what you want to avoid when you're using Anki. I found that I was trying so hard just to get through many cards, but when I started like actually trying to learn it, obviously I learned it better. So the easy interval, this is the number of days it'll take before you see it again if you click easy. So I left it at 3, but this depends also on how far out your test is. So for instance, I'm going to come over here and talk about maximum interval. So if your test is in 2 weeks, you should put this at a week. You should probably see your cards every week, even if if the test is far out. So whenever I put the maximum interval at, I'm probably going to put the easy interval at just a little bit below it. But that's just something to keep in mind for later. Everything else is pretty much default except for the maximum interval. I changed that depending on when my test was. And then display order, I always do mix with reviews. So these two guys, because I want to see my new cards, but I also want to see my old cards. So that way you're not only prioritizing your reviews and you're actually getting through the cards that you learned the day before or something like that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my like school card usage, whatever. But now I'm going to talk about how I used Anki for the MCAT. So little background about me. I took the MCAT in March 2024. So by this video, just like a few months ago. I did pretty good, I guess. I did okay. I got a 129 in Chem Phys, a 128 in Biochem, and a 129 in Psych Soc. I mean, cars, I did fine, but not good enough to talk about it in a video. But I do think that using Anki was like a huge game changer. There's just things you have to know for this test, and Anki is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. So I'm going to start out with talking about, this is like the 3 pillars. This is what I think is the most important stuff to do for the MCAT. Starting off, miles down. You need to do this deck. It's honestly a non-negotiable. If you think that you know all of your gen ed classes and biochem and you know all those terms, don't do it. But my guess is that you probably don't. And if anything, it's only going to help you. The next deck is Mr. Pankow. I specifically used the Psych Soc section because I found the miles down was fantastic and I didn't really need to do it. I didn't need to do them with the other decks made by him. I only wanted to focus on the Psych Soc, but I do think that this deck helped me get my 129, and I feel like if I hadn't done it, I would have missed those points, or I would have missed those questions that are going to push you up to the higher scores. Definitely recommend. And then missed questions, self-explanatory. If you're using UWorld or using any other question bank, which is obviously highly recommended, you should be making a card for almost every question you get wrong. When I would get a question wrong on a practice test or on UWorld, I would say, okay, what is the topic they're asking and how can I put it in a card format where I won't get it wrong? Don't test yourself on the questions per se, because that's just a waste of time. Test yourself on the terms and the definitions. So let's say I missed a question on galvanic and electrolytic cells. I'm not going to ask a question. I'm not going to put the question in the card. I'm going to say, what do electrolytic cells do? What do galvanic cells do? Or blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean. So this is about how many cards I did for my MCAT. I basically made a section for all the stuff that I would miss, all my biochem, all my chem phys, all the psychs, blah, blah, blah. And structures, that's, I don't know, I just wanted to do that because there was a few stuff I needed to know. Basically, I made about 750 to 800 blah, blah, blah cards. More or less, depending on how many questions you got wrong. Honestly, like my diagnostic score was pretty bad. So leading up to my actual exam, I was missing a lot of questions. But then I got them right on the actual thing. Miles down, MCAT deck. Like, this is like the holy grail. Almost over 2,500 cards, but again, honestly non-negotiable. Just do them all. PsychSoc, MCAT. Basically, when you download the Mr. Pankow, you're going to get all of the decks, but I specifically only used this one. So if you would like to use them all, I guess that makes sense, but do with that what you will. Same thing as the previous. This is my MCAT scheduling. I wanted to spread out my cards as far as I could. So basically, this is how I started out, and this is how I finished. So I left this the same almost the entire time of studying, and you have to kind of trust the scheduling. So what that means is you're going to see cards a few times, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I already know this. Like, don't show this to me ever again. But if you keep getting them right, they'll go away, and you'll see them at the normal time. All right, so this is like the basics of my MCAT scheduling. So very similar to my class one, except everything is just really, really spread out. I know I said do as many cards as you can for class, but for the MCAT, I found doing 50 a day in the beginning was a good start. I think if you want to ramp it up to like 200 or 250 in the very beginning, you can. But over time, like, you're going to be doing so many cards, you're probably only going to want 50 a day. And then these are my learning steps, obviously much more spread out. This is specifically special. I think you should leave your interval at 45 because that's basically like a month and a half later. If you're starting to study in December, you want to see the cards again before you test, obviously. This value kind of allowed me to see my cards, even if I knew them, at least like 2 or 3 times before my test. So for like, what is the powerhouse of the cell? Mitochondria. Yeah, I obviously know that like the back of my hand, but I saw it a few times before my test just in case. And then I also added a timer. This is, I think, normally just left blank, but I found that when I had the timer on the screen, I was more likely to slow down and say, okay, I have 45 seconds. I can actually think about this for a minute. And I found that definitely helped me slow down and really focus on recalling the information rather than just like blurting out the first thing that comes to my mind. So that pretty much wraps it up. Just wanted to make a quick video going over the basics. I wish I would have started using this program earlier. I think it would have saved me a lot of stress and probably helped my grades a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them.